Okay, so you're thinking about reading Mistborn,
Yeah,
The Final Empire, but not totally sure if it's worth the time. It's a pretty big book. There's a lot of hype.
yeah, it's definitely a popular one.
They've
And we're here to help you sort of cut through all that and figure out if this is the book for you.
Exactly. So, like I said, this is a deep dive. We've got tons of reviews and analyses, so we're going to try and break it all down. Got
Mhm.
strengths, weaknesses, what makes it unique, and then you can decide if you want to join this rebellion against the Lord Ruler.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that right away, the Lord Ruler, because I think that's one of the things that makes Mistborn stand out. It's this world where evil has already won. The hero lost 1,000 years ago, and this terrifying God King, he's in total control.
Okay, so not your typical chosen one saves the day kind of story. I'm already interested.
Yeah.
But fantasy's a crowded market,
Mhm.
right? What makes this stand out from, say, Lord of the Rings or even Throne of Glass?
Oh, those are great comparisons. Actually, like Lord of the Rings, Sanderson builds this really complex world with its own history and mythology and even languages. But instead of like lush forests and epic battles, we get this desolate, ash-covered world where people are just struggling to survive.
This ash-filled world. I'm curious, is that just a cool visual or is there a deeper meaning there?
It's both. The Ashfall, it's this constant reminder of the Lord Ruler's power, the devastation he's caused, but it's also tied to the magic system, which is another thing Mistborn is known for. I mean, think Throne of Glass, but with a magic system that's even more intricate and consistent. It's called Allomancy, and it's based on ingesting and burning different metals to gain powers.
Hold on, eating metal. That sounds a bit dangerous.
Yeah, probably not a good idea in our world. But Sanderson makes it work within the story. Different metals grant different abilities, so enhanced strength, speed senses, you can even influence emotions or see glimpses of the future. It's not just about the powers, though, it's how they're used strategically in combat, but also everyday life.
So not just a random assortment of cool powers. There's a logic to it.
Exactly. Sanderson is known for his hard magic systems. There are rules and limitations. There's even a chart in the back of the book to keep track of all the different metals and their effects. That's a big part of why people love his work. You can really dive deep into the magic system and how it impacts the story.
I see. So he's almost created a puzzle for the reader. But some reviews mention the writing being kind of simple. Does that mean he sacrifices character development or emotional depth because he's so focused on the magic system?
That's a good question. Sanderson's strength is definitely in plotting action world building. His writing is very direct and to the point, so some readers might find it lacking nuance. But remember, this is the first book in a trilogy. He's setting the stage for a much larger story with complex characters and relationships.
Okay, so maybe not the most poetic prose, but maybe that's not what we're looking for in this type of fantasy. What about the characters then? Who are we rooting for in this ash-filled world?
Well, our main protagonist is Vin, a young street urchin with a traumatic past. She's a Mistborn, which means she has the potential to master all the Allomantic powers. Think Selena from Throne of Glass, but grittier with a darker backstory. She's tough, resourceful, but deeply distrustful of others, which makes her really interesting.
I like her already. A street urchin with hidden magic powers. Classic. But it sounds like Sanderson brings something new to it. But if she's our heroine who's guiding her on this journey,
That would be Kelsier, a charismatic thief who also happens to be a Mistborn. He's the only person to ever escape the Lord Ruler's prison, so he's a legend among the oppressed people, the Ska. Think Robin Hood with magical powers fighting against a tyrannical god king.
okay, now that is an epic mentor figure. Why does he take Vin under his wing, though? What's their dynamic like?
He sees her potential both as a Mistborn and as someone who can help overthrow the Lord Ruler. But their relationship is complex. Kelsier is driven by vengeance, while Vin is still learning to trust and believe in something bigger than herself. He teaches her to control her powers and use them strategically, but also challenges her to face her past and find her own reasons for fighting.
So it's not just a straightforward master-student relationship. There's some depth there.
Absolutely. Their interactions are some of the best parts of the book. Kelsier pushes Vin to her limits, but he also cares for her, and Vin learns to see past his charm and recognize the sacrifices he's made for the rebellion.
So he's not just the all-knowing mentor. He's got flaws, which makes him more interesting. You mentioned the Ska earlier. Who are they? What role do they play in this rebellion?
The Ska are the oppressed masses forced to live in terrible conditions under the Lord Ruler's rule. They suffer the most from his tyranny, so they have the most to gain if he's overthrown. But they're divided and afraid. It's not easy to rise up against a god king, especially when you're just trying to survive.
So it's not just good versus evil. There are some gray areas in this political landscape.
Definitely, Sanderson explores the complexities of power, oppression, and rebellion. He shows us how people cope with tyranny, from quiet resistance to open defiance. And he asks questions about the cost of revolution, whether violence is ever justified.
Wow, this is getting deep. But you said Mistborn is a trilogy. Is this first book satisfying on its own, or does it end on a cliffhanger?
Sanderson is known for writing satisfying endings, even in a series. The Final Empire has a definite conclusion, but also sets things up for the next books. Think of it like the first act of a play. You get some closure, but you're left wanting more.
That's good to know. But let's be real, some readers might find the whole metal-eating magic system a bit much. Is it easy to follow, or do you need a degree in metallurgy to understand it?
Sanderson explains it really well. You learn with Vin as she discovers her powers. And remember that chart I mentioned. That's there to help if you get lost.
That's reassuring. What about the pacing, though? It's a long book. Will I get bogged down in descriptions or side plots?
Not at all. The pacing is actually quite fast. Sanderson keeps the story moving with action, intrigue, and plenty of twists. He also uses time jumps effectively, so it never feels like it's dragging.
You've definitely made Mistborn sound interesting, but
Yeah.
I'm still wondering, is it really for me? I like fantasy, but I also enjoy books that make me think, that challenge my assumptions about the world. Does Mistborn deliver on that front?
That's a great question, and honestly, I think that's one of the things that makes Mistborn more than just a fun adventure. It tackles some big themes like the nature of power, the resilience of the human spirit, and how hope can exist even in a world where darkness seems to have won. I think it does. It really does. The world Sanderson creates is so bleak, you know. The Ska have been oppressed for centuries. They're told rebellion is pointless, that the Lord Ruler can't be defeated.
Right, but then Kelsier escapes from the pits of Hassan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shatters that belief. He
Yeah.
represents this spark of defiance, this refusal to accept things as they are.
So hope is embodied in a character, in someone who challenges the way things are.
Yeah, and it's not just Kelsier. Vin's journey is also about finding hope in unexpected places. She starts out so broken and distrustful, only knowing how to survive.
But she trains with Kelsier and interacts with the other members of his crew.
Right, and she starts to believe in something bigger than herself.
You mentioned the crew. What's their role in all this?
They kind of represent the different ways hope can show itself. There's Ham, he's loyal and steadfast, the protector. Then there's Breeze, cynical but ultimately kind-hearted, he's the manipulator. And Sanai is the Terraceman scholar. He holds the key to understanding the world's history. Each of them has their own reason for fighting their own source of strength.
It sounds like Sanderson is saying hope isn't just about grand gestures or epic battles.
No, it's not. It's also about the little acts of courage, the bonds of friendship and loyalty that get us through tough times.
It's what makes the story so powerful. It's about finding hope when everything seems dark, reminding us that even in the worst situations, the human spirit can still find a way. You've convinced me I'm adding Mistborn to my reading list.
Right.
But for those still undecided, what would you tell them to convince them to give it a shot?
If you want a fantasy novel that's more than just an escape, a story that makes you think about power and oppression and the power of hope, then Mistborn, The Final Empire is definitely worth your time.
I love that. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. So to everyone who's been listening to our deep dive into Mistborn, we encourage you to check out the book and see for yourself what awaits in this ash-covered world.
Happy reading. Yeah, I think it really delivers on that. I ask some tough questions, especially about hope. You mentioned it earlier, and I have to say, that's what intrigues me the most. How could there even be hope in a world where the supposed hero already failed?
Right. It's like you said, this world is full of despair. The Ska have been under the Lord Ruler's thumb for centuries. They're practically taught that fighting back is pointless.
Exactly. And then Kelsier shows up after escaping the pits of Hathsin. He changes everything.
That's like he's a symbol of rebellion, just refusing to give up.
Yeah, he's a powerful symbol. And it's not just him. Vin's story is also about hope. It's just finding it in unexpected places. You know, she starts out so broken and alone. She's just focused on surviving.
But through her training with Kelsier and getting to know his crew, she starts to see there's something more.
Exactly. She starts to believe in something bigger than just herself.
You keep mentioning the crew. What role do they play in this whole idea of hope?
I think they showed the different ways hope can exist. Like Ham, he's so loyal and protective, always there for the team.
Right, and then there's Breeze.
Yeah, he's the cynic, but he's got a good heart deep down. He's the one who can manipulate situations to their advantage. And then Sonheist, he's fascinating.
Terraceman scholar.
Yeah, he's got all this knowledge about the world's past, and I think he represents a different kind of hope, a hope for understanding.
So each member of the crew embodies a different aspect of hope.
Right, and they all have their own motivations, their own strength. It's really well done.
It sounds like Sanderson is saying that hope isn't always about these big heroic moments. It's also about the smaller things.
Exactly. Like everyday courage. The connections we have with each other, that's what gets us through.
I love that. That's what makes this book so powerful. It reminds us that even when things are really dark, that spark of hope can still exist. And it can make all the difference.
It really can.
Oh, I'm sold. I'm definitely going to read Mistborn. But for anyone listening who's still on the fence, what would you say to convince them to give it a try?
If you like fantasy that makes you think, that pushes you to consider different perspectives, and really explores what it means to hope even when all seems lost, then you should absolutely read Mistborn, The Final Empire.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Mistborn. We hope you enjoyed it and that it maybe even inspired you to pick up the book yourself.
Thanks for listening.